Welcome everybody. Welcome everybody to the symposium and to our session this afternoon. Today, I'm going to be moderating the session titled Stigma Issues and Ways to Counter Them. And please, if you could share your thoughts on social media by using the Police Resilience tag, and please by tagging @Resilience SYMP on Twitter. My name is Tom Coghlan. I'm a retired NYPD detective. I'm also a clinical psychologist who specialized in police and public safety psychology, primarily working in intervention and assessment domains. I'm a past visiting fellow with the IACP, and I am currently the owner of a private practice. I operate a private practice in Great Neck, New York. I'm the owner of Blue Line Psychological Services. As well, I'm a network clinician with the PAPA program, which is a peer support program offering confidential mental health services that works autonomously from the NYPD. I'm also the New York area clinician with the Drug Enforcement Administration's EAP program. So you can learn more about our session today and about our speakers with links to further reading on each presentation at resilienceSymposium.org. And with that said, I would like to introduce our first speaker today. In the symposium on stigma issues and ways to counter them, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tremaine Sayles. Dr. Sayles is the director of the NYPD Counseling Services Unit with over 25 years of behavioral health and substance abuse experience. He's a U.S. Army veteran of 26 years. He served as a senior behavioral health consultant for the U.S. Army Reserve. He worked at the Pentagon, and he's worked as a behavioral health advisor to the Department of Defense, the FDNY, and multiple law enforcement agencies. And Dr. Sayles will be speaking today in regard to effective coping mechanisms. And with that said, I'd like to pass the baton on to Dr. Sayles.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Quick technical issue. Can I just click share screen and share my screen so that you can see my slides? Is that how we're doing it?
Yeah, just click share screen and then it'll pop up. You click your PowerPoint presentation and then click on the bottom right to do the, X out of that.
X out of that?
You got to click the icon on the bottom right because this shows, the one on the bottom right.
That one?
No, see where it increases the view and everything, the icon to the left of that on the bottom right. So there's one that like 4 little boxes. Yeah. Keep going left, keep going left.
This one.
That one there. Good enough. Go ahead.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Coghlan. Thank you, Jeff, for allowing me this opportunity. I know we don't have a great deal of time, and in part, Jeff has said I better keep to my time or he's going to beat me. So I'm going to go quickly through my slides. So I like to start by saying, where the head goes, the body follows. And I've gotten this as a line from martial arts, but also to keep in mind that our mindset and our views on the world oftentimes impact us physiologically. So where the head goes, the mind follows. And I also wanted to say that we have to keep in mind that sometimes it isn't what happens to us that causes us to suffer. It's what we say to ourselves about what happens. And I think that's also important in dealing with first responders, law enforcement, and members of the military, and people in general as it pertains to mental health, wellness, and stigma. So I want to take a few minutes to go through something that I know everyone is familiar with, but at the same time, I want to take this time to go through it so we all kind of have an idea of some of the terms that I'm using. And the one I wanted to begin with was just stress and the nature of stress. And that what's key about stress is it's the experience of a perceived threat. And I always want to emphasize perceived because I think what comes up as it pertains to stigma is oftentimes people will say, well, I don't understand why John was bothered by that. I wasn't bothered by that. Or I don't know why she's upset. I'm not upset. Well, stress and trauma is truly in the eyes of the beholder. It really depends upon how someone perceives a situation. So I think that's important to begin with. And also trauma. And I really like to emphasize when we're talking about trauma that a trauma response is, generally speaking, a natural response to a terrible event. It's not really an issue unless this response persists for a certain period of time. And I think all too often in law enforcement, first responders, the military, one of the issues we have is this ideology that we're not supposed to be traumatized. Things aren't supposed to bother us. Well, I tell people all the time, if it didn't bother you, then you might be what we call a sociopath. I would hope that if you saw something that was devastating, that yes, it would bother you. But I think what happens is people don't want to acknowledge or admit that they're bothered. And the way we get through this is to begin to normalize it. Yes, it can bother you. It's okay. If it's still bothering you weeks later or a month later, it's impacting your social and occupational functioning, then come in and let's talk about it. But if at first you're bothered by something you've witnessed or done, that's natural. That's okay. So again, trauma is basically a response to a stressor, an extreme stressor. I tell people all the time, there's no correct way to respond to traumatic events. All too often, I'll hear, I'm not supposed to be bothered by this. This isn't supposed to impact me. Well, that's not the case. Any change experienced by an individual can be deemed stressful. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Sometimes we look at stress as death of a family member, failing a course, poor roommate dynamics, coworker dynamics. However, sometimes stress can be a promotion. Sometimes stress can be changes in job responsibilities. All these things contribute to stress. So although we often think of it as something negative, I think it's important to understand that we can be stressed and overwhelmed by positive aspects of our life. Again, a promotion, new responsibilities, birth of a child, a marriage, things that we may believe are, things that should bring people joy. Working from home, I've noticed in my practice has become there's an inordinate amount of stress related to people being at home around each other during this pandemic. Trying to do work and make sure your child is attending to their third grade math has been incredibly stressful to a lot of us. So there's lots of forms of stress beyond just some of the negative. And when we receive that stress, it can affect our mental well-being, physical, emotional, spiritual. It can affect every part of our life. And stigma comes in because we don't want to acknowledge this stress. We don't want to acknowledge these things are problematic, especially the more positive ones. We don't want to acknowledge that a promotion, a new job, even working from home, having the birth of a child, something positive or new to us. In some instances, even getting a raise, even having more money. Some people would say, oh no, why would I be stressed out about having more money? Or with more money can come so many added notions of people calling and asking, hey, can I borrow money? Can I fix this? Can I fix that? What do I do with it? All these things contribute to stress. Occupational stress, in the context of specifically who we are and what we do, when we talk about Police Symposium, I wanted to share this because I think when we think about law enforcement, yes, job stress, which comes from occupational duties, for which people perceive themselves as having a great deal of responsibility, yet little to no authority or decision-making latitude. I do not think this could in any way more state the stress that the NYPD and members of law enforcement around our country and around our world are dealing with right now. That level of responsibility is increasing, yet these individuals in their day-to-day really don't have the authority or latitude, and oftentimes they're finding that the decisions are being questioned so much, they don't feel comfortable making decisions because they're afraid of what to do. I remember working at Rikers Island and having a CO want to engage with an inmate, but stopping and being hesitant because he was concerned, if I help this guy, am I going to get in trouble? Is he going to say something or do something? So do I help him? Don't I help him? What do I do? And I witnessed that, and it's really unfortunate because this was a person who really genuinely wanted to help someone out and was just torn as to which way to go. And yes, you're spending the best years of your life doing a job that you hate so you can buy stuff you don't need to support a lifestyle you don't enjoy. Yeah, that kind of sums it up. Again, I understand my audience, but speaking, so I'll go through this part quickly. We know that stress is going to create a natural autonomic nervous system response. It's ingrained in us. There's not a ton we can do about it. We are going to respond physiologically. And when that happens, migraines, ulcers, I don't think we acknowledge enough. And this is why it's important to talk about stress, to talk about our problems, to talk about our traumas, to talk about the things that are affecting us, because these stressors physiologically break us down. There's no way around it. They make us far more susceptible to disease and injury. I mean, on a base level, we know when we're stressed, it raises our blood pressure. So we keep being stressed again and again. We don't want to acknowledge it. We do what most people do. We hold it in. And what happens when you hold it in? Sooner or later, it's going to come out. Now, there are emotional responses, PTSD, anxiety, other disorders that occur when people are overwhelmed, stressed, experience something traumatic. Somatoform disorders, factitious disorders, conversion disorders, all kinds of responses. And when we experience those things, oftentimes there's maladaptive coping. Some of the first ways we cope with our stresses, rather than talk about it and move beyond some of the problems and issues, we're drinking. Alcohol overwhelmingly has become part of the culture, law enforcement, fire service, military, because it's an easy, simple way to cope. We're arguing, we're fighting. There's been an increase in domestic incidents within families because of an inability to effectively cope with some of the stressors. Now, what I like to talk about to really help our first responders and first line individuals address these issues is not necessarily talk about it as a function of stress, trauma, mental health, mental illness, because that isn't something that they necessarily want to talk about. But if we talk about optimal performance, idyllic actions and mindset, I am. If we talk about it in that context, because everyone on their battleground, their battle space, it doesn't matter if it's police officers, if it's Navy SEALs, if it's professional athletes, everyone moves to engage in optimal performance, right? That's what everyone seeks out. And so it's a little easier to speak to someone about optimal performance and doing
Dr.
what—
Sayles, it's Tom Coghlan. Sorry to interrupt, just letting you know we're at the 2-minute mark.
Okay. It's important to focus on those things rather than mental illness, because again, that's what produces the stigma. So when I talk optimal performance, I'm talking about enhancing your technical competence, your tactical competence, your mental fortitude. I'm talking about what I like to talk about is perseverance. We've talked a great deal about resiliency, but perseverance and that attitude is going to help us push through and keep going forward. And what are some ways we can ensure that we're engaging in optimal performance? These are some of the standards, but even more, communicating effectively, using our time effectively, reading, exercise. And on a base level, I talk about things like dietary lifestyle. I don't talk about diet because diet is different, but dietary lifestyle, because it can't just be, you got to eat right. Everybody hears about eating right. Just keep moving. Simple things to talk to someone about. Moving so that you don't have a sedentary lifestyle. Drinking water, self-care, peace of mind. And when I say be the island, every human being needs to take time for themselves, away from the rest of the world. And we hear no person is an island, but I say every now and then you have to be the island. Be alone, take time for yourself. Do these things so that you can enhance your performance. And don't look at it as the stigma-inducing issue of mental illness, trauma, stress, but optimal performance. And I'll leave you with this. Warrior's Code. He must seek life in a spirit of furious indifference. He must desire life like water, yet drink death like wine. And success. Why do I succeed? These are the reasons why I succeed. These are the reasons why we all succeed, right? This is what we do on a day-to-day to keep everyone safe so everyone succeeds. With that,
Thank you, Dr. Sayles.
thank you very much. And this completes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sayles. Much appreciated. And with that, we're going to move on to our second presenter in today's panel on stigma. I'd like to introduce Dr. Deborah Richardson. Dr. Richardson is the FBI's Clinical Services Coordinator for the Victim Service Division. Her background is in law enforcement research, project administration, program management, and crisis intervention. Her career includes program management, providing mental health counseling and assistance to FBI personnel and their immediate family members. And today, Dr. Richardson will be speaking in regard to a multifaceted approach to resilience and wellness. And with that, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Richardson. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Sergeant Laura Gibson. She's a police sergeant in Police Scotland. She's currently seconded to the Scottish government, working on their suicide prevention action plan. And Sergeant Gibson is also a Churchill Fellow, where her research interest is police well-being and resilience. And today we have the pleasure of Sergeant Gibson speaking to us about mental health stigma in policing. And so, Sergeant Gibson, I yield the floor.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me speak. Yeah, good. So I've not gone down the route of slide sharing because it just fills me with stress and I would be back there. So I'm going to tell you something about my own experience of dealing with mental health stigma and some reflections on that. So when I first mentioned to my husband, who's a serving police officer, that I was going to tell my story of living with mental ill health, he claimed that it was career suicide. And how ironic that only the year previously, and unknown to him, that I had seriously considered taking my own life. I could not have cared about career aspirations at that point. I was in a dark place. Whether I actually did not care whether I lived or died. And the research tells us that police find it significantly more difficult to seek professional help because of the stigma surrounding mental ill health. Our culture is just to get on with it. That old adage of dry your eyes. The worry that you'll be subject to office gossip, fears about confidentiality, and a negative impact on any career prospects only compounds the silence. However, despite my husband's misgivings, I did tell my story to a packed audience of new recruits at the Scottish Police College. And since that point, I have never looked back. I may not have climbed the ranks, but I have achieved so much more success in my life and an understanding of what is truly important. The esteemed author Matt Haig recently stated, "Mental illness is not a confession, a secret, an insult, a scandal, or something that should be talked about in hushed tones. We should talk about it openly, brazenly, honestly, fearlessly. The truth not only sets us free, it also decreases stigma and saves lives." Mental health isn't as much of a taboo subject as it used to be, but there is still a long way to go. It's still a topic which makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable. Our own mental health is something we would rather not talk about. And you would have to be exceptionally brave to talk about such personal matters in a stalwart organisation such as the police. And sadly, stigma can prevent some asking for help when they most need it. Excuse me. I have been diagnosed with high-functioning anxiety for about 15 years now, and likely endured it for most of my adult life. And for those who understand anxiety a little, will know that some of those major symptoms include low mood, worry, poor self-esteem, paranoia, and as Dr. Seligman discussed yesterday, my all-time favourite, catastrophizing. And I suppose that was the turning point for me. For someone who used to agonize over the worst case scenario, over the most ridiculous set of circumstances, what actually was the worst that could happen if I shared my story? The likelihood was that the worst had already happened. So rather perversely, why worry about it? One of the most notable things we have seen in society which has made the biggest difference in reducing stigma surrounding this topic, was other people sharing their personal stories of their struggles and overcoming mental ill health, whether that's been business leaders, celebrities, and even our own royal family speaking out about their mental health struggles. It has been proved that anyone can experience poor mental health. After all, mental illness does not discriminate. It's helpful to remember that storytelling is one of the oldest art forms of civilization. It entertains, it educates people by reflecting on experience, and it also creates a sense of community. Sharing our stories of mental ill health and recovery can empower and heal by eradicating societal stigma and shame. And what we know is that being able to connect with others through their personal accounts, seeing others accepting their experiences, and being comfortable to talk openly can help reinforce that mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of. Talking openly about a personal experience of a mental health condition is one of the most powerful things you can do. And when sharing a story with an organisation such as law enforcement or the police, I am never surprised by how many colleagues have also experienced a similar difficulty or are supporting a loved one who is. What we can guarantee is that courage is contagious. And by normalizing these conversations helps to change negative attitudes and stereotypes. In particular, sharing your story can make you someone else's source of inspiration and a reminder that you're not alone. It can show that people can continue to work and manage mental health conditions. It's actually not career ending. It encourages others to speak openly about their experience of mental ill health. It can help others experiencing poor mental health to take the brave step of taking action and seeking support. And for those lucky enough not to have experienced mental ill health, it can educate, it can challenge misconceptions, and provide a better understanding of some of the challenges of living with the illness. It can also encourage the organisation to take notice and to make workplace mental well-being a priority. And for those who have perhaps participated in negative treatment of others because of mental ill health, whether that was inadvertently or not, it makes them shift in their seat uncomfortably, consider the impact of their actions, and hopefully remedy past behaviours. There is nothing better than a bit of shame to encourage changing of attitudes. It's important for people living with mental ill health to know that they are not alone. Stigma encourages loneliness. And by sharing your experience and reassuring others that they are not the only ones to feel like this is hugely reassuring. And for many, can be the first step to recovery. Talking about your own mental health journey isn't just helpful for others, it's actually good for you too. Sharing your story can be hugely liberating. It can help you find your voice, reaffirm your values, make sense of what has happened in your life, and start that journey of building resilience. Telling the world, or even one person, about what you have been through and overcome can help you re-establish control and reflect on what worked in your recovery and what didn't. If you have found the strength to talk about your mental ill health, then it is likely that you're in a place where we are strong enough to manage it. For me, it's hugely setting a line. It allowed me to make sense of the chaos and align my story to a beginning, a middle, and an end. Resilience is strengthened by recognising that we are all experts in our own lives. By sharing your story, it allows you to take stock and clarify what is important. Pausing to share your recovery narrative can be a good reminder of your priorities. Taking the time to focus on your values is hugely beneficial too. People who have found their voice, mustered up the courage to share their story, and reaffirmed their values often find a sense of peace at last, of hope that they did not have before. Our own emotional resilience and capacity to cope are strengthened when we realised we have the wisdom and strength to make a difference. And as I have highlighted, sharing your story is hugely rewarding. But there are
Sergeant Gibson, I just want to let you know we're at the 2-minute mark. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So as I've highlighted, sharing your story is hugely rewarding, but there are significant factors to consider before you do so. A number of mental health organisations, for example, Way Ahead, a mental health charity in Australia, or our own CME in Scotland, provide some simple guidance on telling your own story. How to do this safely and ethically. Firstly, and most importantly, decide if you're emotionally and mentally ready to speak. This includes considering why you want to share your story. Is it to inform and educate others? Will your story include other people? Do you need to seek their permission prior to telling their story? It is always best to think about your boundaries prior to telling your story. There may be aspects of your story that you wish to keep private. Telling your story may be an emotional experience as you revisit past experience. It is important to ensure you have a support system in place to deal with any issues which may arise during and after the storytelling process. And keep in mind who you're sharing the story with. You do not know who will be your audience and how they are feeling, so care is needed when talking about topics such as suicide or self-harm. And above all, remember that telling your story does not replace seeking help. And to finish off, through our Police Scotland Wellbeing Programme, we are trying to create opportunities for our officers and staff to be more open and to support one another in an effort to tackle stigma. Whether it's been educating our staff through mental health first aid training, providing peer support with our wellbeing champions, or sharing stories of lived experience and recovery, which are now on our wellbeing app. I've got a final statement. We've made initial steps, but still have so much further to go. Please don't underestimate the power of sharing your story. Having a mental illness has been a defining experience in my life, which has had a deep and lasting impact on the people it has touched. It would be unbearable to think that my experience had no meaning, that it would be lost without the chance to help others. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sergeant Gibson. Thank you very much for your strength and your courage in sharing that with us. With that said, I'd now like to introduce Officer David Kennington. Officer Kennington manages the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department's Professional Wellness Section, which was cited as a model officer wellness program in a 2019 DOJ Congressional Report. He served on several officer safety and wellness panels at the DOJ, and today he'll be presenting a section titled Wellness is Not Weakness. And with that, Officer Kennington.
Thank you, Dr. Coghlan. I appreciate that. Laura, Sergeant Gibson, wow, that was amazing. And thank you for sharing your story. And Dr. Richardson and Dr. Sayles. What a privilege to be on this panel with you guys as well. What an amazing group. I wanted to start by thanking Dr. Jeff Thompson for allowing me to be a part of this Resiliency Symposium as well. There's no way I should be wrapping this up. It should have been Dr. Gibson, so I'm going to criticize you on that. So I do want to take a little bit of time to talk about our program and what we do. I work for Metro Nashville Police Department. I want to talk a little bit about our wellness programs. And then I definitely want to end our time by talking about how we combat the stigma that comes with wellness and resiliency. I manage a professional wellness section within Metro Nashville Police Department that contains two different units, and I'll talk about those. We have a counseling unit and we have a sworn wellness unit. The counseling unit has been around since 1986. It has 4 civilians, one supervisor and 3 counselors. They are all licensed professional counselors within the state of Tennessee. Their mission, I call it the 3 T's, trauma, training, and therapy. It starts with the training really in the training academy with our recruits. And we spend a lot of time with each recruit or with the group of recruits talking about things like stress management and wellness and resiliency and suicide prevention. Currently, we get about 20 hours with each class. The trauma support is responding to critical incidents that we know are a part of law enforcement. We use the CISM Mitchell model, doing defusings and debriefings. All of our clinicians are trained in that. And the biggest piece of our program on the counseling unit is the therapeutic piece. Last year, we opened up over 300 counseling cases. A lot of people will say, well, that's not good. You have 300 people that are seeking counseling. I disagree with that. I think it's 300 people that have the courage to step forward and say, I want to work on myself. I want to work on my relationships. The biggest area that we see are relationships. That's about a third of what we do, couples counseling. But we also, as you know, provide counseling for depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and just general stress. So we're really proud of that program. It's grown significantly over the years. The other side of the wellness section is our sworn wellness section, which we just got this year. I'm very, very happy about that. It took us a long time to get the right chiefs in place and the right personnel to support that program. Our sworn wellness unit is supervised by a sergeant right now who has 20 years of experience in the program, in the department. He has another sworn officer and 2 chaplains. I just got word this week that we're about to get a 3rd officer, so I'm super stoked about that. And she is going to be setting up a mentor program that we're modeling after a couple of agencies across the country. The wellness unit focuses primarily on there's a peer support program. We have over 100 peer supporters in Nashville. We have a family support program where we reach out to spouses and partners to help them. Currently, we're doing weekly webinars where they can check in and just talk about various stressors that they're experiencing during this time. We have a veteran program, a chaplain program, training development. I won't bore you with all those details, but to wrap that up, the overall mission of our wellness section is to provide confidential, free, quality services of counseling, training, trauma support, wellness, and resiliency. We provide services from hire to retire and beyond. And the goal, and it's been my goal since 2007, is just to build healthy police officers, to build healthy police families. And that, I know that sounds simple, but that's been my mission since 2007. I want to, as I transition to the next part here, I want to talk about what 2007 looked like for me. I was in private practice here in Nashville. I had a great group that I was working with, really enjoyed that. Didn't know much about law enforcement at all, other than I respected the police. I had been raised to always respect law enforcement, so I had a heart for it. I had 2 police officers that I was working with in private practice when I learned about the current position within Metro Nashville, and was really excited to tell both of those gentlemen, you don't have to pay me anymore. As in private practice, you're either writing me a pretty big check or you're writing me a check for your copay. And I said, look, I've got great news. I've taken this job with Nashville, the police department. No more copays. And both of them shocked me at the time with the same answer. I won't be seeing you with the police department. You need to refer me somewhere else. And it took me off guard. And I was like, no, it's still me. It's still David Kennington. I have that relationship with you and your family. So I quickly began learning what stigma looked like from within law enforcement. And it was a steep learning curve, I think, for me early, but I quickly learned that not only was there the hesitancy and the skepticism of wellness and psychotherapy, but there was the whole added that if I seek help, the department's going to take my gun. They're going to take my badge. I'm going to be ridiculed. I'm going to be seen as weak. And as we know, officers are trained very early that vulnerability oftentimes can get you killed in the streets. You don't want to make yourself vulnerable. And as we know, the whole process of mental health and counseling and wellness and resiliency sometimes requires an individual making themselves vulnerable. So I knew I had a steep challenge with the mission, again, of building healthy police families and police officers. My job early on was to build healthy relationships and to build that trust with the officers within the department. I had people that came before me that certainly laid the groundwork for me, but there was still some distrust in our department and within the wellness unit. John Gottman talks about building relationships, and he mainly talks about relationships, of course, within a marriage. But I took those same components of knowing that it was going to take time, it was going to take effort, it was going to take concentration, and that it was going to be a day-to-day thing of building. And so I want to talk to you about the 5 steps that we have employed and that we utilize to break down and to attack stigma. I think Dr. Richardson early talked about that top-down and having that top-down buy-in as well as from the bottom up. I think we've done a really good job of building relationships at the academy. But you absolutely have to have that support from your chief, from your captains, from your training academy. I think we're in a really good position here in 2020, despite everything else that's going on in the world with COVID and civil unrest. I'm very blessed to be a part of a department that has chiefs and captains that support our efforts. So I know I'm talking fast because I know this is the clock is ticking here, but I want to talk about the 5 steps that we use to combat. The first step that we combat stigma is early intervention. We believe that is so critical. Early intervention, we have a family day that we offer for all the recruits, their family members. So before they even begin the training class, we have it used to be in person, but now it's a webinar, but we'll get back to in person soon. We meet with moms and dads and partners and spouses and significant others, where we put on a 4 to 6 hour presentation, and we talk about law enforcement. We talk about the challenges. So we're building those relationships with the family members. That first week in the academy, we get 10 hours with each class to talk about things such as resiliency and healthy emotional regulation and stress, and how they're going to be faced with a lot of pressure and stress in the training academy, ways to manage that. So we believe that early intervention is where it starts, building relationships with both the families and then the officers that first week. We believe in utilizing sworn personnel. We have a wellness sergeant, as I talked about, officers. We have our chaplains. We get them in front of the families and the officers, the trainees as well, early on, to share stories like Laura Gibson did this morning, personal stories about struggles with stress and mental illness and PTSD and addiction. So that is so important for them to see that sworn bridge. It's one thing for a group of clinicians to get up and talk, but we believe in having that two-sided, that you have to have the sworn and the civilian. So we meet with all the family and the trainees that first week.
Officer Kennington, we're at 2 minutes.
All right. And we also offer a wellness panel during the academy as well. I'm going to speed this up. The next thing we do is we maintain a consistent presence and visibility during their time, more training. We go in for pop-in visits. We talk to the trainees during their class. We have a family day on the back end as well. So we try to connect from point A to point B. We believe in maintaining and strengthening the relationships. We have a sergeant that does daily wellness checks. He reads the field reports and checks in with officers that may have been involved in critical incidents. And the last thing we do, and this is my takeaway, is we believe in the principle of wellness checks. We offer wellness checks throughout the year. We do general wellness checks, which can occur with anyone at any time as we reach out to our officers and their families. We do annual wellness checks. for those that are in high trauma areas such as CSI and fatal crash and sex crimes. And a wellness check, as you know, is not therapy. It's not counseling. It is simply a check-in to let someone process and have a dialogue. How are you doing? What are your stressors? How are you taking care of yourself? We do wellness checks when people are under a lot of stress. And then certainly we do wellness checks when there's been critical incidents. So again, the one thing that I would leave you with is you may not have a department the size of Nashville. We have 2,000 people. We have 1,500 sworn. You may have a small department, but somewhere in your department, somewhere in that circle, you have someone that cares. You have people that care, that can do wellness checks. You have people that can reach out and connect with people. So I'm always willing, and I love talking about our programs and helping other programs build and utilize their resources. So I think we're all in this together. There's a lot of great resources out there. And again, what Dr. Thompson is doing with this is just amazing. So I appreciate being a part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Officer Kennington. Much appreciated. I'd just like to take a second to just recap some of our speakers' points. Thank you very much to Dr. Sayles for speaking about the various stressors that we experience in police work and how we can adaptively respond as opposed to maladaptively responding to those stressors in order to avoid a variety of negative outcomes, not only in policing, but in our personal lives. I'd like to thank Dr. Richardson for speaking in regard to vicarious trauma and how vicarious trauma can affect law enforcement officers and how victim services can better deliver services to the community by allowing law enforcement officers to see their work through a trauma-informed lens, and speaking to the design of the PREVAIL program, and to encouraging the cultural change to develop a resiliency culture within the agency overall. I'd like to thank Sergeant Gibson for sharing her story in regard to her experiences in law enforcement. And, you know, it is true that we are the best ambassadors to ourselves, right? And kudos to all of those law enforcement officers who have had the strength and the courage to come forward with their own stories. I've personally witnessed it a few times, and it's a very powerful statement. I was there in Chicago when Superintendent Eddie Johnson shared his story at their wellness summit. I was given a presentation at the ICP on PTSD, and I had a chief of a large agency stand up and share his experiences in front of an entire audience, including community activists and his own subordinates. It was extremely powerful. So thank you very much. That sort of experience of having other law enforcement officers share their experience with trauma, it's the sort of thing that retired Sergeant Chris Scallon offers. Chris Scallon from Survival Mindset offers at Trauma Behind the Badge in his weekly seminars. So something certainly to check out. We are the best ambassadors to ourselves. And finally, Officer Kennington, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts about the Nashville PD's wellness programs and speaking to the steps involved in how your wellness program has dealt with stigma. And Officer Kennington, I just want to put you on notice. February of 2021, the National FOP Wellness Summit will be down there in Nashville. So it's entirely possible I might run across you at the Honky Tonks to the Wild Horse. So I expect to see you there.
Great.
Awesome. With that said, I'd like to thank everybody and hand it back to Detective Thompson.